Hi, I'm Chip Rome with the Armstrong Neighborhood Channel, and you are watching In the Know. For this episode, we are at Carnegie Free Library here in Connellsville, and joining me is George von Benko. Hello, George.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. And George has been doing a lot with sports here in Western Pennsylvania. We're going to dig into that a little bit, but you recently wrote a book. And
I
you
did.
Want to talk about that book, please?
Well, it's Dick LeBeau, legendary, the 2008 Pittsburgh Steelers defense, the zone blitz, and my 6 decades in the NFL. And it came out in early July, and the book is doing very well. And of course, LeBeau, a Hall of Famer, just a legendary figure and much beloved by Steeler Nation.
Yeah. And so you're from Connellsville, live in Connellsville right now?
I live in Connellsville. I'm actually from, I went to Laurel Highlands High School. I lived in Hopwood for many years, born in Uniontown.
Yeah. And the neat thing is you're going to be here at the Carnegie Library for a book signing with this book and your other books too, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that's happening on Saturday, November 23rd, starting at 1 o'clock here in this room in the auditorium at the Carnegie Free Library in Connellsville. So if you will, George, talk a little bit about the book. Give us a little detail on it.
Well, I was so thrilled that Dick LeBeau selected me to be part of this book, along with Scott Brown, who used to cover the Steelers for the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review and now works for a Steeler website called Steeler Depot. But Coach LeBeau asked his friend Bill Priatko, who's the oldest living Steeler alumni, who he should get to write the book. Bill and Dick were roommates Dick's first year in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns. And Bill said, you got to get Scott Brown and George von Benko. They covered that team. They know your players. And that's how it came about. And LeBeau wanted to do it because he always felt that the 2008 defense was not given its just due. He felt it was one of the great defenses in NFL history. So the book is primarily about that defense. But when we got into it, we had to convince Dick that 59 years in the NFL as a player and a coach, you can't ignore that.
Right.
We have to do something about you in this book as well. We finally convinced him to do that, and that was the genesis of this book.
Yeah. Well, congratulations for being selected. That's an honor for them to.
Well, I knew Dick very well through Bill Priatko, and I don't consider myself to be the writer that Scott Brown is because my background has been in radio. It's a different form of writing.
Right.
It's a conversational style of writing. I had to teach myself how to write in the AP style and the other way, but one of my strengths was interviewing and storytelling, and that was my part of the book. There's 19 chapters. That's the 19 games that season, culminating with the Super Bowl and the win over the Cardinals. And then I did most of the sidebars for the book about LeBeau, which figured because I'm older than Scott, I actually saw Dick play as a young football fan. So I have a point of reference there and talked about his days with the Detroit Lions and playing with Dick Night Train Lane and Yale Larry and Lem Barney and Alex Karras and all those guys. And then the other side, he was at Ohio State on a national championship team. Just all sorts of tidbits in the sidebars. And that was sort of my bailiwick. Scott did some of them, but I did the bulk of them. Scott wrote the 19 chapters concerning the games themselves.
Okay. Well, speaking of being young, your career in sports started at a young age. I think 15, is that right?
15 years old, and it's funny, I told my mom and dad when I was 5 that I wanted to be a sportscaster. Naturally, everybody said, but when I was young, I would put a little chair in front of the television set, turn down the sound on the TV, and I would do play-by-play into a little tape recorder.
Wow.
And that's how I started to learn to do it. And my basketball coach, Horst Taylor at Laurel Highlands, was the first one to talk a local radio station into putting me on during the games because I knew what they were doing, and that started my career.
That was at WPQR.
WPQR in Uniontown, yeah.
And then you went on to college, and things opened up a little bit more.
Well, from WPQR, I went to WLSW in Connellsville and did several shows. I was a morning DJ there, and then Morgantown.
Okay.
The flagship stations for the Mountaineers, WAJR and WVAQ. I started the statewide sports line. I started Coliseum Countdown. I started Mountaineer Countdown. And, after that, several other stops, including the University of Cincinnati, with my good friend Bob Huggins. We went to college together. They were #1 in the country when I was doing their games. So, and I'm proud that I worked for all 4 of the local schools:
Yeah.
West Virginia, Pitt, Duquesne, and Penn State.
That's quite a resume there.
It is. I've been blessed. I have been blessed.
Yeah. Now, talk about the 9 Super Bowls. You've covered 9 of those. That had to be exciting, too.
It is, and I started covering the Steelers at an early age. I was still a sophomore in high school when I went to my first training camp.
That is an early age.
1969, Chuck Noll's first year. I'm the dean of people still covering the Steelers. I've been covering them longer than anybody around the team right now. And of course, that was through the glory years and all the Super Bowls. And I covered a few other Super Bowls too, but 9 Super Bowls, 2 World Series with the Pirates, all the Stanley Cup championships. So a lot of different things.
Yeah, that's great. And this is your 4th book. You want to talk about your other 3 books that you've
Well, yeah, the other 2 books are the 2 Memory Lane books, Memory Lane Volume 1, Memory Lane Volume 2, and they're kind of unique. I did a column for years for the Uniontown paper called Memory Lane about athletes and coaches from our area. These are compilations of old newspaper columns about some of the great athletes from our area. Jim Braxton, Johnny Lujack, Don Yates, some of the great coaches, and that's all about athletes from our area.
Okay.
John Woodruff is in there. And then the 3rd book is a tribute to my talk show career, going back to the days when I was on WTAE with Myron Cope and Stan Savran. I was the 3rd member, and Sports Talk is about my radio career. And when my dad died, I found a box with 300 interviews in it. And these are interviews with Harvey Haddix and Terry Bradshaw and Mario Lemieux and Chipper Jones and Jerry West and Hot Rod Hundley. And this book is actually selling nationally because of the scope of the interviews. But the interviews, there's a little bit about the subject, a picture, and then the interview just as it happened on the air. Yeah. Q&A style.
And those were tapes, some reel-to-reel, some cassette.
I cried. One of the ones I wanted to use was so old. You've heard about oxidation?
I have, yeah.
The tape flaked.
Wow.
It was an interview with Muhammad Ali at his Deer Lakes training camp, and I cried.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great that you were able to find. I'm sure that was a surprise to you when you found
this. I can't believe Dad kept that stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, he was proud of you, I'm sure.
I'm sure he was. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this book again. So give us the title of this book again.
It is legendary. Okay. The 2008 Pittsburgh Steelers defense, the zone blitz, and my 6 decades in the NFL. The foreword for the book, interestingly enough, written by Troy Polamalu and James Harrison. And I love the quote right above Dick LeBeau's name from James Farrier, who was the captain, the middle linebacker. Unlike any coach I've ever met. Wow. That is LeBeau. Yeah. And here's a look at it. I'll hold it up. But it's doing very, very well, and it's just chock full of interesting information.
Yeah. Congratulations on how well it's taken off since July.
It's an interesting book, and it just fell into place with the 19 chapters for the Super Bowl and the sidebars. And, as I said, and I mean this sincerely, 59 years in the NFL as a player and a coach, that will never, ever happen again. Yeah, that's a long time. He is totally unique in that regard.
Yeah. So you'll be here for the signing at the Carnegie Free Library at Saturday, November 23rd, starting at 1 o'clock. And you're going to talk a little bit, and then you're going to have an opportunity for people to get some books.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the genesis of the book. And then I found in doing these that I'm still on the radio, still doing a talk show on WMBS and Uniontown every Saturday morning and other things. I found that since I'm still working in the business, people want to talk to me about sports. So I'm going to give them an opportunity for a Q&A session before we get into the nuts and bolts of selling the books and signing them.
And you probably enjoy talking about sports too.
I do.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
It's been my life. Yeah.
George, it's been great to meet you. Congratulations. Wish you well with the book. Wish you well with the signing here.
Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure for me to do this.
Yeah. And now, you're in the know.